Well, it's pretty simple. The stakes couldn't be any higher. It's Notre Dame going up against Ohio State for the national championship in the first ever 12-team playoff. And this will go down as one of the biggest games in the history of college football. Let's go. My full preview and prediction is coming right up.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. My name is Tyler Wojciak and I'm the host. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018 and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports, and I'm so grateful you're here with me on Wednesday, January 15th to preview the national championship game between Notre Dame and Ohio State. And thanks for making this your first listen of the day. This is your reminder to please hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast, and let's get right into it. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish are set to take on the Ohio State Buckeyes for the national championship, and just saying that out loud gets me so pumped up that it's really hard to concentrate, but I'll do my best because today we are going to break down the matchups in all three phases of the game, plus I'll share my keys to victory for the Irish and reveal my predictions at the end. But as I've thought about this game for practically every waking second since Jack Sawyer recovered that fumble on Quinn Ewers and took it to the house, which effectively punched Ohio State's ticket in the national championship, I realized that we are literally gearing up to watch Notre Dame play in one of the biggest games in the history of college football. Now, that might seem hyperbolic, and there are so many storylines within this matchup, like Marcus Freeman going up against his alma mater, revenge for the way that last year's game ended between these two teams with the 10 men on the field, the transfer quarterbacks, all of that. But when you take a step back and look at the big picture, I think it's clear that this game will go down as one of the biggest moments in the 150-plus year history of college football. It's the two biggest brands in the sport, or arguably the top two biggest brands in the sport, competing for a championship during arguably the most transformational year in the history of the sport. We're really entering a new age of college football with conference realignment, NIL, the transfer portal, and now the expanded playoff format, which is 12 teams right now. It could expand to 16 here in the near future, but still, this is the first year of this expanded format where it's like a true tournament to make it and then ultimately win the national championship. And we are witnessing a seminal moment in the sport's history, and Notre Dame has a chance to reclaim their spot at the top of college football. When most people think of Notre Dame football, they think of the past. They think of the storied history, the tradition, the mystique. But if they were to beat Ohio State on Monday, January 20th, I believe it will go down as the biggest win in the storied history of the Notre Dame football program. Let's set the scene with what you need to know. So kickoff is set for 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Monday, January 20th, inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia. The game will air on ESPN with Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit on the call. I believe it is the first time that Notre Dame has had the A-Team ESPN crew since the season opener against Texas A&M, and I know some people have their thoughts about Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit. Well, good news. ESPN is airing this game in like 11 different versions on their megacast. You could watch the All-22. You could watch the Skycam. Pat McAfee has his own edition of the broadcast. So there are all kinds of ways for Notre Dame fans to take in this game. The weather's not going to be a factor because this one is played in a dome, but I can tell you for all the fans who are making their way down to Atlanta, it is going to be pretty chilly in the A. There is a high of 34 on Monday, which I believe is a 20-degree drop from what the expected high was yesterday. So bundle up, Notre Dame fans, if you're making the trip. Ohio State leads the all-time series 6-2, and Notre Dame has not beaten the Buckeyes since 1936, back when FDR was president. So it's been a while. In recent history, these two teams have played 6 times since 1995, and Ohio State has won every single game. Oddly enough, this is actually the third time that Marcus Freeman will go up against his alma mater in just his third season as the head coach for the Fighting Irish. And these are two teams who have not really played each other all that much in the past, but they have played a lot in the past few years. They lost 21-10 in the season opener back in 2022, and then Notre Dame lost 17-14 last year on the last play of the game. I don't have to remind you about what happened there at the end, but I also don't have to remind you about Ryan Day, who's their head coach. He took over full-time starting in 2019, but he did serve as the interim coach for 3 games back in 2018 while Urban Meyer served a suspension. And Ryan Day is 69-10 all-time, and yet There were a lot of Ohio State fans who wanted to run him out of town because he lost to Michigan for the fourth year in a row, and they also did not even play in the Big Ten championship. But now he has a chance to redeem himself in the national championship. For the season, Ohio State is 13-2. They lost by 1 point on the road against Oregon on October 12th, and they lost by 3 points to their arch rival Michigan at home during the final week of the regular season, which might feel like a long time ago, but it really wasn't that long. It was just over a month and a half ago, but still, a lot has changed in the time since. And since that loss, Ohio State has turned things around, and they have really steamrolled through the playoffs thus far. They ran Tennessee and Oregon off the field before halftime. That first half against Oregon, you can make the case that's like the best half of football any college football team has ever played, especially when you consider who they were going up against, a team in Oregon who had been undefeated throughout the year. Now, granted, they did have to deal with 2 huge injuries on the offense there, but Ohio State just put their foot on the gas and then ran them out of the field in that game. But their game against Texas did come down to the wire. They won that game by 2 touchdowns, but Texas was knocking on the door late in the fourth quarter to tie the game at 21, but Jack Sawyer came up with the strip sack on Quinn Ewers and returned it 85 yards to the house, and that was the game. The spread in this one, Ohio State is favored by 8.5 right now on FanDuel, and the over-under is at 46.5. Pretty much everyone I've seen is taking Ohio State not only to win, but most people expect them to cover that 8.5 point spread. It was as high as 9.5 when the books opened, but it seems like some money has come in on the Notre Dame side. We will see where that ends up because Notre Dame was basically favored by a point throughout the whole week leading up to that Penn State game. And then right before kickoff, it switched and Penn State was favored by 1. But Notre Dame won that one outright. If you bet $100 on Notre Dame to win outright and they pull it off, you would win $290. So just giving you a little bit of information there. You can choose how to use that as you wish. So I really think when you consider all the circumstances and all the stakes, this would be the biggest win in the history of the Notre Dame football program for several reasons. One, it's the national championship. That's obvious, right? And Notre Dame is going up against a super team that, quite frankly, has dominated them over the last few decades. This is a bigger game than Miami in 1988 and Florida State in 1993 because those are regular season games. Like when I was a kid growing up learning about the Notre Dame lore, those are the 2 games that I heard about the most. I get it for both. Those are, 1 versus 2 matchups in Notre Dame Stadium, game of the century type deals. But even though Notre Dame won those games, that didn't guarantee a national championship. As a matter of fact, they still lost the title in 1993, or a better way of phrasing that would be they got robbed by the voters, but at least they did win it in 1988. It just wasn't really that game. This is for the championship. It's also the toughest championship that anybody has ever had to win in college football because it's the first in the new 12-team playoff format. And I understand that in the old system, only 2 teams were afforded the chance to even make the championship because of the BCS, so it was a little bit less accessible. But those teams who won in the BCS era did not have to win 3 more games on top of what they did in the regular season, going up against the best teams in college football to even get to this point. I also think it's bigger than West Virginia back in 1989 because even though that game was also for the national championship and the Mountaineers were undefeated, they don't have the same level of prestige as Ohio State, and I don't think they were as talented as what Notre Dame is going up against on Monday. And you know how I know this? It's because I never really hear about that game. I hear about the 88 season. I don't really hear about that game against Virginia or West Virginia all that much, and I think it's just because it was not considered as big of a win for the Irish, despite the fact that they walked away from that game with the national championship trophy. Not to mention, Notre Dame is doing all of this without their best overall player and All-American corner Benjamin Morrison, their top 2 edge rushers, Boubacar Traore and Jordan Botelho, their NFL caliber defensive tackle and Riley Mills, 2 of their most important players, defensive tackle Howard Cross and star running back Jeremiah Love, are banged up, and they're not even close to 100%. Plus, they're without their starting center from the start of the season, potentially their starting right guard in Rocco Spindler, and their left tackle in this game hasn't started a game all season, even though he was the projected starter in preseason camp. He suffered a season-ending injury in the first week of fall camp, but because the season is seemingly endless, he was able to suffer that injury, recover, and then start again for Notre Dame because Anthony Knapp, the true freshman, is out this game with a high ankle sprain. Oh, and they're missing their second best tight end, Cooper Flanagan, after he tore his Achilles in the Georgia game. And I'm not even bringing this up to make excuses. There are no excuses in the national championship game. This is just the reality of the situation and why this has been such an impressive run by this Notre Dame team. So if they are able to pull this off. I think you'd have to go all the way back to 1973 to find a win of this magnitude. The Irish beat Alabama 24-23 in the Sugar Bowl that year. Both teams were undefeated. Alabama was number one in the country, and they were led by Paul Bear Bryant, who's one of the greatest coaches of all time. There were 6 lead changes in that game, but Eric Parsegian and the Irish came out victors, and they won the national championship. Although Alabama still claims the title in 1973 because I think there was like one poll who still voted them number one. Listen, I could do a whole nother podcast about that. It's one of the many fraudulent titles that Alabama claims, but we're not here to discuss Alabama math. We're here to talk about a truly iconic game in the history of the sport. And for fans, this is really the opportunity of a lifetime. Like watching your team play in the national championship during one of the most important seasons in the history of the sport, going up against another historically great team is as good as it gets. And when I did the early look ahead show this past Saturday, I referenced the line in the movie Miracle when Herb Brooks tells the U.S. men's hockey team, great moments are born from great opportunity. And similar to the U.S. going up against the Soviet Union in 1980 during the Olympics, nobody is giving Notre Dame a chance. Only time will tell if the Irish will get their storybook ending. All right, now it's time to dive into the Ohio State scouting report. Where does Notre Dame have the advantage against the Buckeyes? That's next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by WayFair. After the holiday hustle, there is nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, WayFair has everything you need, all within your budget. I'm currently looking for furniture, and their huge selection makes it easy to find pieces that fit my style and fit my budget. My favorite part, the free and hassle-free delivery, even for the larger items. WayFair's site was so easy to navigate, and I found everything I needed in no time. There's something for every style and every home, no matter your space or budget. WayFair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals with endless inspiration for every space. Give your home the refresh it needs with WayFair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WayFair.com. WayFair. Every style, every home. Okay, so the first matchup that I want to look at here is Notre Dame's offense going up against Ohio State's defense, because even though the Buckeyes' high-powered offense has been the story of the college football playoff so far because of the way that they lit up the scoreboard against Tennessee and Oregon, I honestly think their defense is what presents the greatest challenge. Notre Dame is going to have to play their best game of the year offensively, and that still might not be enough for them to score more than 24 points on their own, because statistically, this is the best defense in the entire country. Notre Dame certainly has a case as well, but the numbers for Ohio State are a little bit better. They have had one bad game all season long, and that came against Oregon on the road in the regular season when they gave up 32 points and 496 yards of total offense. Other than that one game, they have been absolutely dominant. Jim Knowles, their defensive coordinator, is in his 3rd season with the Buckeyes since coming over from Oklahoma State, and they have had everything clicking since that Oregon game. They are 1st in the country in scoring defense, only allowing just over 12 points per game. They are also 1st in yards per game and yards given up per play. They're also incredibly balanced. They're only allowing 2.7 yards per carry, which is 2nd in the country, and they are number 1 in pass yards allowed per game. They create a ton of havoc plays. They've registered 51 sacks and 106 tackles for loss on the year, which ranks 3rd and 28th in the country, respectively. And normally, if you have a defense as aggressive as Ohio State's, one that's able to get in the backfield that much and really sell out, they might be susceptible to giving up explosive plays, but not this group. They have only allowed 12 runs of 20 or more yards in the season and only 8 completions of 30-plus yards, which is 2nd in the country. Oh, and by the way, they're 2nd in red zone defense and have maybe one of the best goal line defenses we have ever seen in college football. I mean, Texas was scared to death when they got to the goal line. They didn't even try to run the ball. They ran that sweep play that had nothing going. Indiana couldn't really score on the goal line. Nebraska, same deal. Oregon struggled as well. So teams just have not been able to score in the goal line set going up against this Ohio State defense. And a big reason why is because of their defensive line. The group as a whole is littered with NFL talent, but specifically on their D-line. JT Tuimoloau could be starting in the NFL right now. Instead, he decided to come back to Ohio State for another year, and he racked up just, 11 and a half sacks on the season, and he basically ended that game last year and ended Notre Dame's offensive chance of running out the clock there when they tried to run that screen play It was Tuimalau who just blew that up and tackled Jadarian Price for a negative gain. And really, that gave them a chance in that game. He also had maybe one of the best defensive games ever by a player against Penn State, not this past year, but the year prior to that, I believe, when he had like a pick six, forced fumble, fumble recovery, all kinds of crazy stuff in that game. So he is just an unbelievable player. And opposite him, you've got Jack Sawyer, who's been playing out of his mind as of late, and he's going to be in the NFL soon. At linebacker, they've got Cody Simon and Sonny Styles, two of the best linebackers in the entire country. Notre Dame recruited Sonny Styles heavily. He is the younger brother of Lorenzo Styles Jr., who also transferred from Notre Dame to Ohio State, although he's redshirting this year. He has not really done anything for the Buckeyes, but his younger brother certainly has. He has been phenomenal ever since he reclassified and joined the Ohio State Buckeyes 1 year early. Cody Simon has 104 tackles on the year, 7 sacks, 7 pass breakups, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. Sonny Styles is not far behind him with 94 tackles, 5 sacks, 5 PBUs, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery as well. At corner, they've got Denzel Burke, who's really good, but did look a little bit vulnerable going up against Oregon during the regular season, not so much in the playoff game. And then they've got Davison Igbinosun, who leads the team with 9 pass breakups, but he also leads the country in pass interference penalties. He's due for at least 1 per game. Tim Priester from Irish Illustrated made the joke that he's holding in pregame warmups. He is about as physical as it gets at corner, and Notre Dame should try to target him because they're probably going to get at least 1 or 2 flags going up against him in this game, but he's willing to take that risk, and he's still a pretty good corner despite the penalties. At the back end of their defense, they've got Caleb Downs at safety, who is one of the best players in the entire country. He was a Thorpe Award finalist who transferred from Alabama after he was a freshman All-American, and he is just a ridiculously good football player. This is just an elite defense. There's no other way to describe it, and they've only allowed more than 17 points in a game twice this season. Both were to Oregon. The regular season game I mentioned earlier when they gave up 32 points, and they gave up 20 points in the Rose Bowl, but I don't even really count that because Ohio State was up 34-0 at one point in the game. So yeah, they took their foot off the gas a little bit, and then Oregon was able to score some points that really didn't have any effect on the outcome of the game. So how is Notre Dame going to move the ball on this unit? That gets me to my keys for the Notre Dame offense in this one. They have got to win on first down. I don't expect them to get like 5 yards every first down, but they just can't go backwards. They need to get like 2, maybe 3 yards on those first down plays because they had a lot of negative plays against Penn State. They allowed 8 tackles for loss against the Nittany Lions, and a lot of those came on early downs that put Notre Dame behind the sticks. They're going to try and run the ball, but Notre Dame can actually get some things going into the quick passing game, especially on early downs, because Ohio State plays a ton of zone defense in Jim Knowles' 4-2-5 scheme. So if they're able to have some success early on in the quick game, that will put them in more advantageous situations on third down and at least give themselves a chance to keep the chains moving. That's how Steve Angeli, the backup quarterback, got it going against Penn State. Like up until that point, Notre Dame had nothing going on offense, but Angeli came in, they got the quick passing game going, they realized they might have something there against the Nittany Lions, and then they took advantage of the second half, plus they were able to run the ball. Notre Dame is dealing with more injuries on the offensive line. Like, what else is new? They're going to have to break in Charles Jagasaw at left tackle, which is where he was projected to start at the beginning of the season, but then he missed the whole season with his torn pec injury. So I think he's going to start there. Notre Dame released their depth chart, and he was listed at left tackle and right guard. I think they're going to give Rocco Spindler a chance to start the game at right guard, but we're going to have to see. Either way, they're going to have to protect the offensive line going up against this elite defensive line unit. In order to do that, they're going to have to get the ball out quick and try to get some early yards on first and second down. So that is my first key for the Notre Dame offense. My second one really just has to do with the coordinator, Mike Denbrock. He's got to get really creative here because the odds of them just lining up and pounding the rock against this unit in ordinary sets is highly unlikely. They are just too good, and no one has been able to have success running the ball against them, including Texas, who's been very good at that all season long. They at least had a chance to run the ball in this game because the game was still in doubt in the second half, but they just could not get anything going. So Notre Dame is going to have to get creative with the way that they run the ball. They're going to have to create mismatches with misdirection, exotic formations, motions, trick plays, you name it. They got to try going up against this Ohio State defense. But if they do that, I think they will set them up to hit on some explosive plays. Pound for pound, player for player, Ohio State has the advantage across the board on this side of the ball. But Notre Dame can keep them guessing, and they have the stars who can make plays when they present themselves. Notre Dame is not winning this game unless Riley Leonard, Jeremiah Love play great. Those are the two guys on offense that got them to this point, and they have to do it again on the biggest stage. I'm not really sure what to expect from Jeremiah Love health-wise, but they are going to need every ounce of energy he has got in this one. And for Riley, he can go from being one of the most criticized players to an all-time legend if he can lead this offense to some points against Ohio State. All right, now let's flip it over. Let's take a look at the Ohio State offense going up against Notre Dame's defense. This is big on big. This is as good as it gets in college football. It's Chip Kelly versus Al Golden, arguably the best offensive mind in a generation, going up against the best defensive coordinator in college football. The chess match is honestly going to be as exciting as the play on the field here, and everyone on the outside is giving Ohio State an advantage in this matchup because of their star power, but Notre Dame's defense more than held their own against the Buckeye offense last year, only allowing 17 points. I understand it's a different quarterback. Jeremiah Smith is out there, but they had Marvin Harrison Jr. out there too. So I think at least in that respect, it's pretty even. But Ohio State's offense has been extremely explosive in the playoffs, but they were not nearly as consistent all season long. They're 12th in the country in points per game, but they're also third nationally in yards per play. The big key here is they have struggled to run the ball at times, despite the fact that they have arguably one of the best running back duos in the entire country with Quinshaw Junkins, the transfer from Ole Miss, and Travion Henderson. They're only 66th in rush yards per game and 29th in yards per rush, but they do have the best wide receiving core in all of college football. That's pretty much been the case ever since Brian Hartline took over as the wide receivers coach for his alma mater. Jeremiah Smith, the true freshman phenom, who I'm sure you've heard a ton about already, he has a chance to be the best wide receiver since Julio Jones and maybe even Calvin Johnson. I know that seems crazy to say, but he is just that good. Physically, he's a freak. The fact that he's only 18 years old does not make any sense to me. For the year, he has 71 receptions, 1,227 receiving yards, and 14 touchdowns. Emeka Egbuka is the veteran who's had an amazing career, and he's almost like an afterthought because of Jeremiah Smith, but he is still racked up 75 receptions, 947 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Their third wide receiver, Carnell Tate, was like priority number one for Notre Dame on the recruiting trail when he was a recruit, and he is their third receiver in this room. That's just how loaded they are. Tate has 50 receptions on the year, 698 yards, and 4 touchdowns, and the guy throwing them the ball is Kansas State transfer Will Howard. When Will Howard was in the portal, Notre Dame was looking at him, USC was looking at him. At one point, it felt like he was going to go to join Lincoln Riley and the Trojans, but then Miller Moss threw for 6 touchdowns in the Holiday Bowl against Louisville, and I think that spooked Will Howard, and he ended up at Ohio State. Well, good for him. He's in the national championship right now, and oddly enough, he has not been nearly as effective running the ball this year as he was when he was with Kansas State, but he's been solid throwing the ball for most of the year. Has just under 3,800 passing yards, a 72% completion percentage, 33 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. And he really impressed me in that regular season game against Oregon, but he made that one big mistake at the end of the game, just lost sight of the clock and then just slid, and then that was the game. It prevented Ohio State from having a chance to kick a game-winning field goal, but he obviously benefits from having a great wide receiving core, but I just believe he's a genuinely good college quarterback. The book on him is pretty simple, though. When he's got time to throw, he can dice you up. But when he's pressured, he struggles, like most college quarterbacks. His completion percentage drops 22% when he's under pressure compared to when he's kept clean, which again, most college quarterbacks are not going to be as accurate when they're under pressure, but I think that is a very significant drop, 22%. He's also thrown 40% of his interceptions when he's under pressure, and he's pretty capable of making some ill-advised throws like the pick 6 he threw early on in that game against Penn State. He also had a fumble that game going into the end zone, and he was picked off in his own end zone when he's playing Michigan. Part of that is obviously on the offensive line. It's not all him if he's getting pressured. They have had to replace their starting center, Seth McLaughlin, the transfer from Alabama, after he suffered a season-ending Achilles injury before the Indiana game. They also lost their starting left tackle earlier this year, and they've had to shift some guys around the offensive line, much like Notre Dame has had to do, but still, teams have really not been able to get Will Howard on the ground much. They're 10th in the country in sacks allowed. So I don't look at this group as a weakness, but it is just weaker compared to the rest of the offensive unit, and it is a matchup that Notre Dame absolutely has to win, which leads me to my keys for the Notre Dame defense. They have to get in the backfield and rattle Will Howard early on in the game. This is a tough task because, like I said, he's a good quarterback, but I do think he can get in his own head. He is a very emotional quarterback. We have seen the highs and lows. The highs against Oregon, the highs in the college football playoff, the lows against Nebraska, the lows against Michigan. Michigan got a big hit on him early on in the game, and he played his worst game of the season by far. He finished that game 19 of 33 for 175 yards passing with 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. But more critical than the numbers, it was clear that Chip Kelly and the offensive staff just didn't trust Will Howard in that game. They totally abandoned what had gotten them to that point. And I think that if you rattle Will Howard and force Chip Kelly to run the ball, you at least give yourself a chance at containing this offense. Sure, they're going to get some yards on the ground, but this unit could not run the ball against Michigan. They finished that game with just 77 rushing yards. They also struggled against Nebraska and Indiana early on in this year. They won both of those games, but they only ran for 64 yards against Nebraska and 115 yards on 29 carries against Indiana. So their run game is gettable, and that is very important. If you rattle Will Howard, force him into running the ball, you at least give yourself a chance there. My second key for the Notre Dame defense, you've got to limit explosive plays and force Ohio State to put together long drives. And look, Ohio State still might score on those long drives. They are just that good. But the longer the drive goes on, the more likely it is that they make a mistake. Against Texas, they had a lot of self-inflicted penalties, but they're also a little bit more prone to turning the ball over, right? If there's more plays, more chances to make a mistake, and then an opportunity for Notre Dame to take advantage. You also give your defense a chance to hold them to a field goal. And last year, when you look at this matchup between Notre Dame and Ohio State, it was just a big chunk play on 3rd and 19 and a long run by TreVeyon Henderson that ended up being the difference in that game. And then when you look at the Texas game last week, the Longhorns were actually able to keep this offense in check for the most part, but TreVeyon Henderson broke off a 70-yard screen play right before the end of the first half, which was such a gut punch to Texas, and they got another touchdown on a fumble recovery. So Texas kept them in check, but it was that big explosive play that really was just like twisting the knife against that group, and it was ultimately too much to overcome for the Longhorns. All right, now for the third phase of the game. Notre Dame special teams are a huge reason why they've made it to the national championship game, and they're going to have to rely on Marty Biagi's unit once again to pull off the upset. More on that, plus my prediction right after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Let's take a look at the third phase of the game. Notre Dame special teams going up against Ohio State's special teams unit. For Notre Dame, their special teams is one of the most important reasons why they have even made it to this point, and they have gotten this far in the college football playoff. They punched their ticket to the national championship when Mitch Jeter knocked in the game-winning field goal against Penn State, and they effectively put the game away against Georgia when Jaden Harrison returned a kickoff 98 yards to the house to give the Irish a 20-3 lead. They are going to have to answer the bell once again to beat Ohio State, and it's not going to be easy. This is a disciplined unit. Their kicker, though, Jaden Fielding, has been pretty inconsistent as of late. He missed 2 field goals under 40 yards against Michigan, and that's a big reason why they lost that game. He has now missed 3 of his last 7 field goal attempts, which puts him at 11 of 15 on the season with a long of 46. Now, 15 attempts is not that many, which shows you just how good their offense is, but in a game like this that might come down to kicking, that's very important, something to keep an eye out for, because as we have seen from Mitch Jeter, kicking is a mental game, and I'm not sure how confident Fielding is right now, so that is something to monitor, because meanwhile, Mitch Jeter has all the confidence in the world. He's only missed 1 kick in the college football playoff, and that was blocked. He made 2 against Indiana, 3 against Georgia, and then 2 huge ones against Penn State. Ohio State's punter is pretty average. I mean, statistically, his numbers are pretty comparable to James Rendell, Notre Dame's punter, although I have to say, James Rendell has been a lot better as of late, which is good because Notre Dame has needed him in these tightly contested battles going up against Georgia and Penn State. Caleb Downs is the Ohio State punt returner, and he made one of the biggest plays of the year for the Buckeyes when he returned one to the house against Indiana to give the Buckeyes a 2-touchdown lead in the first half. You remember that game, as I was talking about it a lot in the preview before Notre Dame took on Indiana. Like, even though Ohio State won that game by a lot of points, it was really a big play on special teams, or two big plays on special teams that set that up. Indiana, their punter let one go right in Ohio State territory, so then they just walked in for a touchdown, and then they allowed the punt return for a touchdown. So it was a 7-7 game, but then because of two big special teams plays, Ohio State had a 21-7 lead, and that was way too much for Indiana to overcome in that one. Brandon Innes handles kick return duties. He is averaging 15.7 yards per return, but he is a very good athlete. When he was coming out of high school, he was like the number 1 or number 2 rated wide receiver in the entire class, which shows you just how loaded that Ohio State wide receiver room is, right? Like, Innes was the top guy in his class, and he's the 4th guy in that room. Like, he barely gets that much playing time, but he does come out there to return kicks. So if he has a chance to break one, he certainly is capable of doing it, even though he hasn't done one this year. But as a whole, like, Ohio State has not been nearly as aggressive on special teams as Notre Dame has been, but they just haven't really had to. They've blown out the vast majority of the teams they play. They have still been able to block 2 punts/kicks this year compared to Notre Dame's 6. So I expect Notre Dame to be the aggressor in this phase of the game. And I do think that the kicking game is going to have a big factor on this game. If you remember last year, Spencer Schrader missed a critical field goal for Notre Dame, and then the Irish ended up losing that game by 3 points. So that stuff matters. And so far in the playoffs, Mitch Jeter has been nails while Fielding has been pretty inconsistent. So I give the edge to the Irish on special teams, which might not seem like much, but could prove to be critical, especially if Marcus Freeman is as aggressive as I expect he will be. Maybe they try to run another fake punt. Maybe they try another reverse on a kickoff return like they did against Indiana. They have to create some plays when they present themselves, and special teams is a great opportunity for Notre Dame to do so. They've really utilized special teams a lot this season. I expect them to do it again in the national championship, which leads me to my predictions. Everyone in the entire world is picking Ohio State. Like, everyone. I have not seen one person in the national media pick Notre Dame to win this game. I've seen like a couple people pick Notre Dame to cover, but everyone is betting Ohio State to cover 8.5 points. On paper, I get it. They have more talent across the board. They've got more depth than Notre Dame when you consider the amount of injuries that Notre Dame has had to endure this season. This is the best team money can buy. You've heard about it all year long. Ohio State paid $20 million for this roster. They went out and they got Quinshaw Junkins in the transfer portal. They got Caleb Downs in the transfer portal. But a lot of that money went to keeping guys on the roster, keeping guys like JT Tuimoloau from going to the NFL, or a Jack Sawyer, or a Travion Henderson. This is a very good, very battle-tested team. But frankly, they haven't won anything, right? And a lot of people felt going into the season that this Ohio State team was going to win it all, that they probably could go undefeated. Then they lost to Oregon on the road. And then they lost to Michigan again for the 4th year in a row. And the big reason why all these donors and all these boosters at Ohio State ponied up is because they couldn't handle losing to Michigan for 3 years in a row and then watching them win the national championship. So they went all in on this season. Like, this is about as all in as it gets for Ohio State. And so far, they don't really have anything to show for it other than a trip to the national championship game. But I'm sure any Ohio State fan will tell you a trip to the national championship game means nothing unless they win it. So in the 2 biggest regular season games of the year, they lost. They lost to Oregon and they lost to Michigan at home. But to their credit, they have looked unstoppable in the college football playoffs. They destroyed Tennessee in the first game. That game was over in the first half. They destroyed Oregon in the Rose Bowl. That game was over pretty much after the end of the first quarter. But then after that game, everyone started getting back on the Ohio State bandwagon, picking them to be the clear favorite to win the championship. And here they are, just one game away. But they looked a little vulnerable against Texas. They didn't dominate them in the same way that they dominated Tennessee and Oregon. And Tennessee lost to Georgia twice, a team that Notre Dame just beat a few weeks ago. So why is nobody giving the Irish a chance to win this game? Part of it is history. Let's be honest. Notre Dame was in the national championship in 2012. They got absolutely annihilated by Alabama. And I think that this Ohio State team is as close to a super team as we have seen. There's really not a super team in college football this year, because Ohio State has already lost a couple games, but considering the amount of NFL talent on that team, like that's about as close as it gets. So how could Notre Dame possibly win this game? They got to do what they've been doing. They need to play their best. Let's make that abundantly clear. Anything less than their best is not going to be good enough against Ohio State in the national championship. But if they play their brand of football, if they're physical, relentless, fast, and aggressive, they are going to have a chance to win this game in the fourth quarter. When you look at Ohio State's schedule, the teams who play the most similar brand of football as Notre Dame are Nebraska, Penn State, Michigan, and Tennessee. Those are teams who are very physical at the line of scrimmage. They can run the ball well, and they play great defense. Now, Ohio State hammered Tennessee. So the argument in favor of Notre Dame does not really bode well. I'll give you that one. That was also one of the best games, if not the best game Ohio State has played all season long. But they beat Nebraska and Penn State by a combined 11 points, and they lost to Michigan by 3 at home. Notre Dame is better than all three of those teams. They just proved it against Penn State. They didn't play Michigan this year, but I like the Irish in that game. So Notre Dame can win this game by playing their brand of football because it is a style of play that is not best suited for Ryan Day and Ohio State. That has been proven time after time. And it bothers Day clearly that people consider Ohio State to be a finesse team. I don't know why, because they are the best finesse team, but that's how they lost to Michigan. They got stubborn and they tried running the ball and they couldn't do it against Michigan because they tried to beat Michigan by being Michigan. And guess what? It didn't work. So if they try to beat Notre Dame by being Notre Dame, I don't think it's going to work. And if it becomes a track meet, yeah, Ohio State is going to win this game because they have better players on the perimeter. But I don't think Notre Dame is going to let that happen. I think the Irish defense is going to step up and at least contain the Ohio State offense. They are absolutely going to make some big plays. They are going to score some points. But if Notre Dame can just contain them a little bit and then make one big play or two to give their offense a chance for an easy score, or if they win the turnover margin by at least 2, they are going to have a chance in this game. Notre Dame is going to come up with some big plays on special teams to help out their offense, and I think that offense is going to do just enough to get enough points on the board. So I like the Irish to pull off an improbable 24-21 win over the Buckeyes and win their first national championship since 1988. It is going to be a 60-minute battle, and I would not be surprised if it went into overtime. It's going to be extremely difficult for Notre Dame to pull this off because Ohio State is way too good to just blow them out. That is not even a remote possibility, but there is something special about this Notre Dame team, and unlike big games in the past, Notre Dame has shown that they have the horses to win these types of games going up against the best teams in the country. And if they pull this off, it will go down as the greatest win in Notre Dame football history. It'll be a return to glory, and selfishly, it's going to be the best day of my life because I will be in attendance with my family. And as I said in the Look Ahead episode, this is like my sports utopia. If you gave me like the ideal scenario as a sports fan, it would be Notre Dame beating Ohio State in the national championship, and it is a legitimate possibility. A slim possibility maybe, but it's a possibility, and I think the way that this Notre Dame team is playing and the way that they have just found ways to win, I think they're going to do it one more time, going up against Ohio State, who has proven themselves to be the best team in this country. But on Monday, inside of Mercedes-Benz Stadium, I think Notre Dame is going to be the better team. It only has to be for one night. But for one night only, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish are going to be better than the Ohio State Buckeyes, and that'll be enough to win a national championship. Man, just saying that out loud, I just feel some kind of way, man. I am so excited for this game, but that is going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. We aren't even close to being done previewing this game. I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning with Tim O'Malley from Irish Illustrated. Tim and I have been trying to do something together for the past couple weeks now, but due to his chaotic travel schedule, the fact that the wildfires just started ravaging LA and started really just throwing a wrench in my entire schedule and livelihood, we are going to be back here tomorrow morning, Tim and I, more coverage on this game, and we also are going to be doing a mailbag later in the week, plus I have some more special guests too. So much coverage coming your way. If you do have a mailbag question, remember to send it in. You can drop yours in the YouTube comments below, or you can tweet at me at Locked On Irish, or slide in the Instagram DMs at Locked On Irish Pod. I cannot even begin to explain how much fun I've had doing this show all season long, and I am so grateful for everyone who has tuned in along the ride. We are not done yet, though, that is for sure, so make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the pod so that we can see this thing through. Have a great day, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.